So you want to land a job in the EU bubble in Brussels, but you're struggling with it. Bear with me, I have something to tell you, and I know how that feels. Yes, because I lived and worked in the EU bubble in Brussels for 12 years, navigating both the private and the public sectors, sending out countless applications, drafting hundreds of CVs and cover letters, and finally sitting on interview panels. And through the years, I've observed the patterns of what works and what doesn't when it comes to securing a job in this highly competitive working environment. So having received a number of questions after my previous videos on what it takes to work at the European Commission, I thought it was time to put together a structured guide on what it takes to land a job in the EU bubble. So this video will be about the key factors you have to consider if you want to land a job in the EU bubble in Brussels. But okay, now just a few words about myself. My name is Federich, I'm an international lawyer based in Brussels, Belgium, and in this channel I share insights about lawyering, professional growth, personal development with the goal to help as many people as possible. Now back to the video, check it out. So my first advice if you want to land a job in the EU bubble is to find a hook, or also an entry point. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when trying to get a job in the EU bubble is applying aimlessly. You shouldn't do it. In fact, Brussels is a major hub for law, business, politics, international organizations, and simply wanting to work in EU affairs is too vague. So you need an entry point, something that connects your background, your skills, your expertise to this environment. So how can you do it? I came up with some examples of hooks that you may want to think about. Think about a regional representation. You are from the south of Italy or you are from the Greek islands, it's very likely that there will be a regional representation in Brussels about your local community. This may be your way in. So try to contact these people, try to network with them, because these ties, these links can help you a lot. The second example is what I call the cause-driven approach. For instance, you're passionate about climate action, about digital rights. Well, in Brussels, you will find many NGOs, many think tanks, which work in these fields, and this may be also your way in. So you have to understand if these causes resonate with you as a person or with your set of expertise. The third example, and by far the most underrated one, is your cultural and linguistic background. In fact, Brussels is one of the most multicultural cities in the world, and language communities form very big networks, so you have to use it to your advantage. And when I'm asked, I always tell people, are you from Romania? Are you from Slovakia? Are you from France or Ireland? Gather with people from your country, because that will give you a way in to this environment. And the fourth example of hook or entry point is the industry-specific expertise. For instance, you worked on competition law like I did, on climate law, on energy policies, and Brussels is filled with consultancies, law firms, and institutions which seek this type of professionals who have that type of expertise. So you have to realize that Brussels is a dense network of specializations, and finding your entry point will help you focus your job search and increase your chances. And this is where the second essential element comes into play, and this is languages. So Brussels is a very multilingual city, probably one of the most multilingual cities in the world, and if you come to Brussels you will hear plenty of languages. But there is one non-negotiable requirement for most EU-related jobs: strong English skills. And it may seem counterintuitive because the official languages of Belgium are French and Flemish, but in the EU bubble, the main dominant working language is English. And the reason is simple, because the EU institutions and international organizations based in Brussels bring people, bring professionals from all over Europe and all over the world. So they had to find one main working language, and that is English. English is simply the most commonly used working language and probably the simplest for everyone. But this doesn't mean that other languages are not relevant. In fact, they can be a very important asset for you. For instance, French and German, they can be very important in the institutions and other organizations. In fact, they are the other two working languages of the European institutions, but also Italian and Spanish, they are widely spoken in Brussels, in the working environment, and in the wider international community. And your native language, whatever that can also be a huge asset. Trust me, I've seen plenty of vacancies targeting, for instance, Romanian speakers, Slovakian speakers, Czech speakers, Lithuanian speakers, and there is where you have a huge added value. But remember, as I said, your English must be very strong. You don't go anywhere without a good English. And it has to be good in both writing and speaking. And even if you're not a native speaker, you must be able to communicate effectively and fluently. And this is something that recruiters will notice right away in the context of an application process. And I can tell you also by experience, because I sat on several interview panels, this is something that we look at, that people look at here in Brussels in candidates' applications. However, unfortunately, the language you speak is not sufficient. You have to leverage it by networking strategically. In fact, networking in Brussels is fundamental. It's fundamental to understand processes, it's fundamental to understand what it takes to be here, to live here, and to work here. So for instance, many job vacancies are filled through recommendations and internal referrals, so simply applying online may not be enough. So you have to broaden your network, you have to get to know more and more people that are relevant to what you want to do there. But remember, networking strategically doesn't mean sending random LinkedIn messages. It has to be targeted and strategic, as I said. So how to do it? You may want to target specific people or specific departments in an organization that you may be interested in which you have some form of expertise. Or maybe you may want to connect with people with whom you have something in common. This can be your nationality, your background, your professional background, your academic studies, your professional expertise. For instance, as a lawyer, I've always found it easier to connect with other lawyers because we share many other challenges and many other experiences, right? Or for instance, because I studied in the United Kingdom and at the London School of Economics, I found it easier to connect with professionals who had a similar background, who had a similar academic background. But remember, networking should be about building genuine relationships, not just about asking for job opportunities. People will not consider you in that case. So try to engage in relevant conversations, attend events, be present in the relevant circles. And once you manage to network, try to find ways to stand out. In fact, finding ways to stand out in Brussels is essential because competition is fierce and very, very intense. So if you want to get noticed by people, you have to highlight what makes you different. And this is what I always tell people when they ask me. A generic background won't do much. Many people have a generic background. You have to stress your main qualities. But first and foremost, you have to tailor your profile to a specific role. For example, I recently spoke to a person who was working in a national parliament and was interested in coming to work in the EU bubble. And I asked this person a simple question. What are you doing there? And the response was, I work on several legislative procedures. And while this may be very interesting and relevant for the Brussels bubble, it's not enough. You have to stress your specific experience. You have to tailor to the role that you're looking for. For instance, stress the specific files you are handling and link them to some EU policies. And personally, I have always adopted my own story. For instance, sometimes I was stressing my island origin, my Sardinian origins, because I wanted to connect it with regional policy. Some other times I focused on sector-specific expertise like competition or internal market law because that is where I worked for several years. So the key is not to brag or exaggerate. The key is to frame your experience in a way that best adapts to the role and to the direction that you want to take. And when you do it, and this is also something that I always tell people, make sure to be relevant and concise. This is essential. And this is essential because recruiters in Brussels, including consultants and lawyers like me, read a lot of applications and they don't have time to go through all of them. So they really want to have a quick look at them and try to understand if this or that candidate has the right requirements. So for instance, your CV and cover letter, they should be concise, direct, well-structured, to the point. They shouldn't include all your experiences, whatever they are, because they are not relevant for the job maybe. So for instance, if you're applying for an energy policy role, don't talk about your experience in digital policies unless they are strictly relevant to the job. And similarly, if you're applying for a legal position, emphasize your substantive legal work rather than, for instance, administrative or procedural tasks. Let me tell you, and I'm sorry to say, a poorly structured, lengthy application can really be a red flag. So you have to show right from the start that you can communicate effectively and you can state your case very briefly. Then another great way to get a job in the EU bubble is to put a foot in the door. And this is something we say in Italy. We say put a foot in the door as if we try to keep the door open. What do I mean by that? So you're trying to find your first job in Brussels or your first full-time role in Brussels. Try to find ways to step into the EU bubble. A great way is through internships. For instance, the Blue Book traineeship of the European Commission or the Schuman traineeship of the European Parliament, they open a lot of doors. Another way is through secondments. For instance, if you're working as a public official in a national administration, you have the chance to be seconded to a EU institution or to a EU agency. But also if you're working for a multinational company, maybe there's a chance to be seconded in the office of this company based in Brussels, right? And another way is through participation in expert groups or policy groups set up by the EU institutions, in this this or that policy field, that is another great way. Or also by commenting on public consultations as a stakeholder. By doing that, you liaise directly with the European institutions or with the relevant agencies, and you have the chance to get to know policy officers and other people who work in that environment. Personally, I did the Blue Book traineeship of the European Commission 11 years ago, and that was for me a turning point. In fact, it gave me first-hand experience of how the Commission works and also allowed me to build a network of people, which then helped me a lot later on in my career. And finally, the latest advice I would give to someone who's trying to land a job in the EU bubble is an advice that I would give to anyone in whatever field, and it is to be confident. And this is also linked to personal experience. Anxiety can be your biggest obstacle in whatever environment, in whatever city, in whatever job. And even more in the EU bubble, which is full of very smart, highly specialized professionals. But you know what? They're also human. In my case, early in my career, I let anxiety get the best of me during interviews or application processes. But then, little by little, I realized that confidence was the key to success, even in the EU bubble. If you don't believe in yourself, why should a recruiter believe in you? And don't get desperate. Rejection is perfectly normal. Most people get rejected many more times than they are accepted. I personally had many more rejections than successes when it comes to job applications in the EU bubble. But you know what? There's a trick. Persistence and confidence will make the difference in the long run. So to conclude, finding a job in the EU bubble is tough. It can be very tough, but it's not impossible. And to summarize, here's what you have to focus on. First of all, find a hook or an entry point. Secondly, master languages, especially English. Thirdly, network strategically with the right people. Fourth, make yourself stand out. Fifth, be relevant and concise in your application processes. Sixth, get a foot in the door, whatever that means. Seventh, and most importantly, be confident. And if you enjoyed this video or if you found it helpful in any possible way, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It would very much help me in my YouTube journey, and it would also help many other people who want to see this type of content. And if you have any questions about what I shared in this video, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in Brussels, maybe, if you're confident. To the next one. Peace.